The whole apartment carried the scent of rain, clean, damp, and faintly earthy, like the storm outside had wandered in and decided to stay. Late March in Boston painted everything in shades of gray, the kind that made the world feel slower, heavier, quieter. Distant thunder rolled through the city, a deep growl echoing between buildings, while raindrops tapped gently against the windows as if asking to be let in. Inside, the air was warm and still, wrapping around the small space I shared with Jordan, my best friend and roommate of the past 4 years. Our place wasn't much. A narrow living room that doubled as a dining room, a kitchen barely wide enough for two if we turned sideways, and 2 bedrooms tucked at the end of a short hallway. But it was ours, peeling paint, creaky floors and all, and that had always been enough. I closed the door behind me, shaking the rain from my umbrella as droplets dotted the scratched wooden floor. The lights were dim, the overhead bulb flickering like it was on its last legs. Jordan was stretched out on the couch like it had been built for her, which, honestly, it kind of had been. Normally she'd be sitting up by now, teasing me about my soggy hair or starting one of her ridiculous debates about whether cereal counted as soup. But tonight felt different. She was quiet. Too quiet. Her head rested on a pillow, one arm thrown across her face. Even from a few feet away, I could see the faint flush in her cheeks and the way her dark curls clung to her forehead in damp spirals. She wasn't just tired. She was clearly sick. "Rough day at the studio?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I kicked off my wet boots. Jordan groaned softly, cracking one eye open. "More like a rough day losing a fight with this plague," she rasped, her voice low and strained. She coughed, winced, then pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm pretty sure. I caught it from that kid who sneezed directly into my soul during open studio hours." I smirked, hanging my coat on the hook by the door. "Sounds like you should start charging hazard pay for toddler germs." She let out a weak laugh that quickly faded into a groan as she sank deeper into the cushions. Jordan was 28, just a year younger than me and usually unstoppable. Late-night painting sessions, early morning yoga flows, endless grant applications. She powered through everything. Seeing her like this, wrapped in a blanket and looking so drained, felt strange. Not bad, just different. Like catching a glimpse of something private I wasn't supposed to see. I moved into the kitchen and flicked on the kettle. "Tea?" I asked, already pulling a mug from the cabinet. "Yeah, sure," she mumbled, barely loud enough to rise above the soft hum of the storm outside. Rain streaked down the window above the sink, thin trails racing toward the sill. For a moment I just watched them, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. It had been one of those long days. Clients who didn't know what they wanted, but somehow wanted it done yesterday. Still, coming home to Jordan usually made the world feel a little lighter. Except tonight. Something felt off. Not the weather, not the city, but the way my chest tightened every time I looked at her, curled up and shivering under that blanket. "You look like you're auditioning for a zombie movie," I said, leaning back against the counter as the kettle began to whistle. Jordan let out a low snort and shifted her arm, glaring at me with both tired eyes. "Thanks, Sam. Real supportive." Her tone was dry, but there it was, the flicker I knew so well, that spark she carried even when she could barely keep her eyes open. The one that always pulled me into her orbit. "What are best friends for if not brutal honesty?" I shot back with a grin, pouring hot water over the tea bag. Steam curled upward, soft and comforting, wrapping the kitchen in warmth. I told myself, it was just another night, just a storm, just Jordan being dramatic about a cold. But as I carried the mug over and set it on the coffee table, she tried to sit up only to slump halfway back down. "Man, I feel like garbage," she muttered, rubbing her face with one hand. Her cheeks were flushed, curls a damp mess, and for The first time she looked small against that oversized couch. Not weak, just human in a way I wasn't used to seeing. I nudged the mug toward her. Drink up, you'll live. She tried to smirk, but it came out softer than usual, almost thankful. You're stuck with me either way, she murmured, fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the mug. I chuckled and sank into the armchair across from her. Lucky me. Thunder rumbled again, deeper this time, making the windows tremble. The room felt smaller, like the storm outside was pressing closer, searching for a way in. I focused on the steady rhythm of the rain, the faint warmth of the tea in the air, anything to ignore the strange flutter tightening in my chest. She was just sick. I was just helping. That's what friends do, right? But when Jordan lifted the mug and sent me a faint smile over the rim, something told me tonight wasn't going to stay simple. Rain hammered harder against the glass, drowning out the quiet hum of the apartment. The air felt heavier now, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Jordan sat curled up on the couch, hands wrapped around her mug as steam drifted across her face like a thin veil. She'd managed only a few sips, every motion slow and tired, as if the fever had drained the spark out of her. "This is pathetic," she muttered, setting the cup down with a soft clink. "I can barely lift my arms." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back with my arms crossed. "You sure you're not milking this for sympathy?" She shot me a look, half glare, half grin. Pure Jordan, even through the fatigue. "Oh yeah, Sam, totally. I faked a fever just so you'd play nurse," she rasped. I laughed, shaking my head. "If that's your plan, it's failing miserably," I said, nodding toward the blanket slipping off her shoulder. "You look like a burrito that gave up halfway." Jordan snorted and pulled the blanket back up. "Rude. I'm a premium burrito, thank you very much." She tried to sit up straighter, but a wince crossed her face as her hand pressed against her forehead. "Okay, fine," I said with a faint smile. "A premium burrito that needs a shower. You look miserable." "I feel disgusting," she admitted, her voice weak but honest. I tilted my head, watching her fight to keep her balance. Something warm and uneasy twisted in my chest. "You sure you can handle that? You look like you'd pass out halfway there." Jordan groaned and flopped back against the cushions. "Don't tempt fate, man. I'm already on thin ice here." Another roll of thunder shook the walls, the lights flickering briefly. I stretched my arms over my head and sighed. "All right, drama queen. Come on, I'll help you. Can't have you passing out and blaming me later." She cracked one eye open, a faint smirk tugging at her mouth. "You're actually serious?" "Of course I am," I said, keeping my tone light. "What's a best friend for if not dragging you around when you can't stand on your own?" Jordan's smirk softened into something quieter. "Fair. Just don't drop me." I crossed the room and offered her my hand. She took it, her fingers cool and unsteady, and I pulled her up carefully. Her arm looped across my shoulders. Her weight was heavier than I expected. Heat radiated through her hoodie, seeping into my side. "You're like a walking furnace," I muttered, as we shuffled toward the hallway. "Yeah, well, you're stuck with me," she murmured, her head dipping slightly. It wasn't a long walk, just a few steps to the bathroom, but each movement felt slow and deliberate, like the air itself had thickened around us. I nudged the bathroom door open with my foot and flicked on the light. The tiny space was all white tile and chipped paint, the mirror already fogging from the humidity outside. As soon as I turned the shower handle, hot water hissed through the pipes and steam began to rise, filling the room with a soft, hazy warmth. Jordan leaned heavily against the sink, catching her breath. "You good?" I asked, stepping back a little. She nodded, though it was slow, uncertain. "Yeah, just give me a sec." Her knuckles were white against the porcelain, and I hesitated. Normally, I'd let her handle herself. She was stubborn like that, but tonight she looked like she might actually fall over. Dude, you're not exactly inspiring confidence, I said, crossing my arms. She glanced up, hazel eyes catching the light, and gave a short laugh. What? You going to stand there and supervise? Make sure I don't drown? I rolled my eyes, trying not to smile. Tempting, but seriously, you need help? She hesitated, then gave a small, resigned shrug. Maybe, just don't make it weird. Me? Never. Keeping it light, I stepped closer and helped her tug the hoodie over her head. She wobbled, slightly, steadying herself with a hand on my shoulder, and I focused on the practical stuff, making sure she didn't stumble, tossing the damp hoodie aside. Steam had filled the space completely now, softening every edge, wrapping the room in warmth. Okay, I said, backing toward the door with a teasing grin. That's where I draw the line. I'm a good friend, but not that good. Jordan laughed, the sound hoarse but real. Noted. Now get out before I change my mind and make you scrub my back. I raised my hands in surrender and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly shut behind me. The sound of the shower running filled the apartment, a steady white noise beneath the storm. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening to the occasional cough or shuffle from inside. Minutes passed. The rain eased into a softer patter. I found myself staring at the scuffed baseboards, the faint water stain on the ceiling. Anything to keep my mind from wandering to the way her hand had lingered on my shoulder, the way her breath had hitched when, wandering to the way her hand had lingered on my shoulder, the way her breath had hitched when I'd pulled her up. The door creaked open. Jordan emerged wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, skin flushed from the heat. She looked steadier but still fragile in a way that made my chest ache. Feel human again? I asked. Marginally, she said, managing a crooked smile. Thanks, Sam. Don't mention it. I handed her a clean t-shirt and sweatpants from the laundry basket. Go crash. I'll make soup or something. She took the clothes, fingers brushing mine. You don't have to. I know, but I'm going to. She studied me for a moment, something unreadable in her eyes, then nodded and shuffled toward her room. I watched her go, the towel slipping slightly as she disappeared behind the door. The storm had quieted to a gentle drizzle by the time I stood over the stove, stirring canned chicken noodle soup because it was the only thing we had. The apartment smelled like steam and broth and rain-soaked wool. I ladled the soup into a bowl, added a sleeve of crackers, and carried it to her room. Jordan was curled under the covers, eyes half closed, hair fanned across the pillow. She looked small again, but softer now. Less like a fever dream and more like her. Soup for the invalid, I said, setting the bowl on her nightstand. She cracked a smile. You're the worst nurse. And yet here you are, alive because of me. She laughed, then winced as another cough rattled through her. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. Eat, then sleep. Doctor's orders. Yes, Dr. Sam, she mumbled, but she reached for the bowl. We fell into a quiet rhythm, her sipping soup, me pretending to read the back of a cereal box I'd grabbed from the kitchen. The rain had stopped entirely. The city outside felt hushed, like it was holding its breath. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and sank back into the pillows. Hey, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Stay? I looked at her surprised. You sure? She nodded, eyes already drifting shut. Just until I fall asleep. The storm's gone, but I still feel like garbage. I hesitated, then kicked off my shoes and stretched out on top of the covers beside her. The bed was narrow, but we'd shared worse. Camping trips, cramped road trips, that one time we both crashed on a futon in college. This felt different, though. Charged, Jordan's breathing evened out slowly. Her hand found mine under the blanket, fingers curling loosely around my wrist. I didn't move, didn't speak. Just listened to the quiet, the faint hum of the radiator, the soft rustle of her hair against the pillow. Outside, the clouds parted. A sliver of moonlight slipped through the blinds, painting silver across the floor. I stayed until her grip slackened and her breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did I let myself exhale. Tomorrow she'd be back to teasing me about my terrible taste in music. Tomorrow the apartment would smell like coffee and paint thinner, and the chaos of two lives overlapping. Tomorrow we'd pretend this night had been nothing more than a fever dream. But tonight, with the storm gone and her hand still warm against my skin, I let myself wonder what might happen if we stopped pretending. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the windows of my apartment like it had a personal grudge against the city. Thunder growled in the distance, low and ominous, as I sat in the old leather armchair, its cracks familiar under my palms. The room smelled faintly of coffee and the damp earthiness that seeped in whenever the storm raged like this. Nathan was sprawled on my couch, a pitiful sight, pale, shivering, bundled in a blanket that did little to hide how miserable he looked. His dark hair stuck to his forehead, and his usually sharp green eyes were dulled by whatever bug had decided to take him down tonight. "Coward," he'd croaked earlier, teasing me as he shuffled toward the bathroom, one hand braced against the wall for support. I'd rolled my eyes, but the words stuck, needling me as I watched him disappear behind the door. "Yell if you need me," I called, pulling the door halfway closed to give him some privacy. Yeah, came his muffled reply, already lost in the hiss of the shower. Back in the living room, the floor was cool beneath my socks as I sank into the armchair again. The storm outside was relentless, lightning flickering through the blinds, casting brief shadows across the cluttered coffee table. Books, an empty mug, a half-eaten bag of chips, evidence of the lazy evenings Nathan and I had spent here over the years. The air inside felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I told myself it was just the storm, just me playing nurse for a sick friend. But there was a flutter in my chest, faint but stubborn, that I couldn't quite shake. The shower ran steadily, its rhythm blending with the rain tapping against the glass. I stretched my legs out, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers to why my thoughts wouldn't settle. The apartment was quiet otherwise, save for the storm, the faint hum of pipes, and the occasional soft thud from the bathroom as Nathan moved around. I'd left the door cracked, half expecting him to call for help or lob one of his sarcastic quips my way. But nothing came. Not yet. The empty mug on the coffee table caught my eye, its faint ring of dried coffee mocking me. I considered making another cup just to keep my hands busy, to quiet the noise in my head. A sudden clap of thunder made me flinch, my gaze darting to the hallway. Steam was curling out now, drifting into the living room like a slow-moving fog, carrying the sharp cedar-like scent of Nathan's shampoo. He'd been using the same one since we met in college, back when we were broke roommates arguing over who left dishes in the sink or whose turn it was to buy groceries. That scent was woven into 1,000 memories, late-night study sessions, impromptu road trips, the time he convinced me to karaoke despite my terrible voice. Nathan was chaos and warmth, a constant in my life for so long that I'd stopped noticing how deeply he'd rooted himself there. Until tonight. The shower shut off with a faint squeak, snapping me out of my thoughts. I straightened in the chair, ears straining. "You alive in there?" I called, aiming for casual but landing somewhere closer to concerned. A pause. Then his voice low and warm through the steam. "Yeah, just give me a sec." I heard the rustle of a towel, the soft slap of wet feet on tile. Grabbing the spare towel I'd left draped over the armrest, I walked toward the hallway and stopped just outside the bathroom. The door creaked open, and there he was, hair dripping, a towel slung loosely around his waist, leaning against the frame like the short walk had drained him. His skin was flushed from the hot water, but his movements were slow, deliberate, like every step was a negotiation with his body. "Wow," I said, tossing him the towel with a grin. "You look like a drowned cat, but a clean one." He caught it with one hand, smirking as he scrubbed it over his hair. "High praise, Elliot," he said, his voice still rough but lighter than before. "I'll take it." His eyes were clearer now, the fever's haze lifting, but he still looked fragile in a way that tugged at something deep in my chest. I stepped closer, ready to steady him if he swayed, but he waved me off with a tired grin. I got it, mostly. He shuffled past me, leaving a trail of damp footprints across the hardwood. I followed, grabbing a thick quilt from the back of the couch and holding it out as he collapsed into the cushions. Better? I asked, draping it over his shoulders. Yeah, he murmured, pulling it tighter. Hot water's basically a miracle. He leaned back, eyes fluttering closed. For a while, the only sounds were the softening rain outside and the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. I perched on the edge of the coffee table, facing him, my hands fidgeting in my lap. The air still carried a trace of steam, softening the edges of the room, and that flutter in my chest was back, stronger, harder to ignore. I studied him, the way the quilt pooled around his shoulders, the damp curls clinging to his forehead, the faint stubble along his jaw. Nathan was always moving, always laughing, always filling the space with his energy. Seeing him like this, quiet, vulnerable, felt like peering behind a curtain I hadn't known was there. My mind drifted to the years we'd spent orbiting each other. The time he dragged me to a dive bar, and we laughed until closing time. The nights he crashed on my couch after breakups, swearing he was fine while I made him grilled cheese. The way he'd look at me sometimes, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes, gone before I could pin it down. He opened his eyes then, catching me staring. The usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by something softer, searching. Hey, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. You ever think about us? Like, more than this? My breath caught. The room seemed to shrink, the storm outside fading to a dull roar. His question hung between us, fragile but heavy, like a glass ornament balanced on the edge of a table. I could have laughed it off, deflected with a joke, turned it into something safe. But his gaze didn't waver, those green eyes locking onto mine, waiting. I opened my mouth, closed it, then swallowed hard. The truth was, I'd thought about it. Late nights when he fell asleep on my couch, one arm slung over the edge, his breathing soft and even. Mornings when he'd hum some terrible pop song while stealing half my coffee. The way his laugh made my chest feel too full, like it might spill over if I wasn't careful. Little moments that stacked up over years, building something I'd been too scared to name. Yeah, I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I've thought about it. His eyebrows lifted, surprise flickering across his face before it softened into something warmer. Good, he said, leaning his head back against the couch. Because I have too. My heart stuttered, a mix of relief and something brighter like a match catching in the dark. You're serious? I asked, leaning forward, elbows on my knees. He nodded, eyes still on me. Dead serious. You're more than just the guy who makes me tea when I'm a mess, Elle. He paused, a small smile tugging at his lips. Though you do make a damn good tea. I laughed, the sound shaky but real. You're a mess a lot, I teased, trying to lighten the weight of the moment. True, he said, chuckling. The sound was rough, but it filled the room with something alive. Good thing I've got you. I held his gaze, really looking at him, the flush of his cheeks, the way the quilt slipped slightly off one shoulder, the quiet intensity in his eyes. The storm outside had softened to a steady patter, but inside something was shifting, clicking into place like a gear I hadn't known was missing. I thought of the years we'd spent as friends, the boundaries we'd never crossed, the way his presence had always felt like home. And now, with his question lingering in the air, the space between us felt smaller, charged with possibility. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, considering. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I don't want to keep wondering what this could be. Not anymore. I nodded, my throat tight. The flutter in my chest was still there, but it wasn't nerves now. It was hope, raw and unfiltered. I reached out, hesitating for a moment before resting my hand on his knee, the quilt soft under my palm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted, leaning forward just enough that our foreheads nearly touched. Scared? He asked, his voice soft but steady. Terrified, I said, and we both laughed, the sound mingling with the rain. The thunderstorm had passed, leaving only the gentle drip of water from the gutters outside. Inside, the room felt warmer, the air no longer holding its breath. Nathan's hand found mine under the quilt, his fingers curling around mine with a quiet certainty. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was full, brimming with everything we'd left unsaid. I stayed there, perched on the coffee table, his hand in mine. The scent of cedar and rain lingering in the air. The city hummed beyond the windows, but in here it was just us, two friends on the edge of something new, something real. And for once, I wasn't afraid to fall. This version expands the original by adding more sensory details, internal monologue, and backstory to flesh out the characters and their history. The emotional core, friends confronting unspoken feelings during a moment of vulnerability, remains intact. But the new characters, Elliot and Nathan, and extended scenes give it a fresh yet familiar feel. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or a different direction. The first crack of thunder rattled the windows of the old Victorian house we'd been renting for the last 2 years, and I nearly dropped the bowl of popcorn I'd been carrying. Jordan looked up from the couch, one eyebrow arched in that way that always made me feel like I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't heard yet. "Scared of a little weather, Mia?" he asked, voice low and amused. "Scared of you stealing all the butter?" I shot back, setting the bowl on the coffee table between us. The living room smelled like cedar from the fireplace we'd finally figured out how to light without filling the place with smoke. And the rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming against the roof like it had a personal grudge. Jordan had been fighting a cold for 3 days. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make his voice raspy and his eyes glassy. He'd spent most of the week on the couch under a pile of blankets, demanding soup and bad action movies. I'd obliged because that's what roommates do. That's what we did, but tonight felt different. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. The TV screen went dark for a second before the movie resumed, and in that brief blackout, Jordan's face was lit only by the fire. He looked soft. Not the sharp-edged, quick-witted Jordan who once convinced our landlord that the hole in the drywall was structural art. This version of him was quiet, a little vulnerable, and it did something to my chest I didn't want to name. "You okay?" I asked, nudging his blanket-covered foot with mine. He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave the screen. "Just thinking. About?" He hesitated. The kind of pause that usually came before he said something ridiculous, like the time he suggested we adopt a raccoon. But this wasn't ridiculous. "About how long we've been doing this," he said finally. "You and me. This thing," I swallowed. "The thing where I make you soup and you pretend not to cry during dog food commercials?" He huffed a laugh, but it was thin. "Yeah, that thing." The rain slowed to a steady patter. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around them. "It's been 2 years," I said. "Since we moved in. Since you lost that bet about who could eat more hot wings and ended up paying first month's rent." He smiled at the memory, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You ever think, maybe it's more than that?" My heart stuttered. I'd thought about it. God, I'd thought about it so many times I'd lost count. Late nights when he'd fall asleep on the couch with his head on my shoulder. Mornings when he'd make coffee strong enough to wake the dead and leave a mug on my desk without being asked. The way he'd looked at me last month when I came home crying after my mom's chemo appointment, and he just held me. No jokes. No deflections. Just his arms around me like I was something breakable and precious. But I'd never said it out loud. Because what if I was wrong? What if this was just comfortable? What if ruining it meant losing him entirely? "Jordan," I started, then stopped. The fire crackled. Outside, a branch scraped against the window like it was trying to get in. He turned to face me fully, the blanket slipping off one shoulder. "I'm not good at this," he said. "The feelings thing, you know that. But I'm tired of pretending I don't..." He broke off, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't want to just be your roommate, Mia. I want more. And if that's not, if you don't..." "I do," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, simple and steady. I do, he stared at me. The firelight caught in his eyes, turning them amber. Yeah? Yeah. He didn't say anything else. Just nodded once, a small, stunned smile tugging at his mouth. Then he reached for the remote and turned the volume down until the movie was just background noise. The space between us on the couch felt smaller suddenly, charged. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, it was quiet, warm, safe. By morning, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I woke up in the armchair again. My neck was going to hate me for this. The blanket tucked carefully around me. The fireplace had burned down to embers, and the living room smelled like ash and coffee. Jordan was gone from the couch. For a second, panic flared. Had he left? Had he regretted it? But then I heard the clatter of a pan from the kitchen, the low hum of the kettle. I padded barefoot across the hardwood, socks abandoned somewhere in the night. He was at the stove, flipping pancakes with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. His hair was a mess, sticking up in tufts, and he was wearing the same faded NASA t-shirt he'd had since college. "Morning," he said without turning around. His voice was still rough but steadier. "Morning," I echoed, leaning against the doorframe. "You're making pancakes? Figured I owed you. For the soup and the everything." He glanced over his shoulder, and there it was, that spark. The one that had always been there, but now I could name it. I crossed the kitchen and stole a pancake from the stack. "You're still sick." "Not contagious anymore, probably." He slid a plate toward me. "Eat. You look like you wrestled a bear in your sleep." "Thanks to your couch hogging," I said, but I was smiling. We ate standing up at the counter, shoulders brushing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. "Like the air after rain." "So," he said eventually, wiping syrup from his thumb. "Where does this leave us?" I looked at him. Sunlight was starting to creep through the curtains, painting gold across the floor. "Right here," I said. "For now, that's enough." He lifted his coffee mug in a mock toast. "Right here." The days after blurred into something new. Not dramatic. Not a movie montage, just us, but different. He'd leave his sketchbooks open on the dining table now, pages filled with charcoal drawings of the old oak tree in the backyard, or the way the light hit the kitchen window at 7:03 a.m. I'd find sticky notes on my laptop. "Don't forget to eat." Nerdeeds in his messy scrawl. We still argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. He still stole the last of my cereal and blamed the raccoons. But now, when he flopped onto the couch after a long day at the graphic design studio, he'd tug me down with him. Now, when I came home late from the hospital where I worked as a nurse, he'd have dinner waiting, burnt edges and all. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks later, when the sky cracked open again. Not a storm this time, just a slow, steady rain that made the world feel hushed. Jordan was sprawled on the porch swing, sketchbook balanced on his knee, the tip of his tongue peeking out as he shaded something I couldn't see. "Come here," he said, not looking up. I stepped outside, the wood cool under my bare feet. The air smelled like wet earth and petrichor. "What are you drawing?" "You'll see." He patted the spot beside him. I sat. Our thighs touched. He smelled like graphite and the cedar soap he'd been using since we moved in. The rain tapped against the porch roof, soft and rhythmic. He turned the sketchbook toward me. It was us. Me, asleep in the armchair the morning after the storm, mouth slightly open, hair a disaster. Him, on the couch, watching me with that same soft look he'd had by the fire. "Jordan," I breathed. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Kept thinking about how you looked. Like you belonged there. Like you always have." I traced the lines with my finger. "You're a sap." "Yeah," he admitted. "But I'm your sap." I laughed, and it felt like the rain had washed something clean inside me. Later, we walked to the corner store for ice cream, sharing one umbrella even though we both knew it was pointless. The rain soaked our shoes, but neither of us cared. He held the pint of mint chip in one hand, my fingers in the other. "You know," he said as we stood under the awning, watching cars splash past. I used to think this was enough, just having you here. But now I want more. I want mornings where I wake up and you're not in the armchair. I want to stop pretending I don't check if you're home safe every night. I kissed him. It wasn't planned. Wasn't some cinematic moment with swelling music. Just rain and mint chip and the taste of finally. He kissed me back like he'd been waiting years. Maybe he had. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. So, he whispered. That a yes? Yeah, I said. That's a yes. We didn't tell anyone at first. Not my mom, still recovering. Not his sister, who'd probably scream loud enough to shatter glass. Just us, figuring it out in the quiet spaces. Some nights we'd sit on the porch long after the rain stopped, sharing a blanket and a beer, talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about the client who wanted a logo that screamed millennial but also whispered boomer, and I'd tell him about the patient who'd proposed to his girlfriend in the ER waiting room. Other nights, we didn't talk at all, just sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars come out one by one. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments about the thermostat, about whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, about the way he left his socks everywhere. But now when we fought, we didn't retreat to separate rooms. We stayed. We fixed it. One evening, months later, the rain came back. Not a storm this time, just a gentle summer shower that made the air smell like childhood. We were in the kitchen attempting to make lasagna, his idea, my execution. Sauce splattered on the counter. Cheese everywhere, you're doing it wrong, he said, hip-checking me out of the way. I'm a nurse, not a chef. You're the artist. Yeah, but I can't boil water without setting off the smoke alarm. I laughed, and he kissed the flour off my cheek. Later, we ate on the porch, plates balanced on our knees, the lasagna slightly burnt but perfect. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening. You know, he said, setting his plate aside, I used to think home was a place, this house, the city. But it's no... You know, he said, setting his plate aside, I used to think home was a place, this house, the city, but it's not. I looked at him. No? He took my hand. It's you. Wherever you are, that's home. I didn't cry. Not quite. But my throat tightened, and I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. The stars were out now, bright and endless. The old oak tree rustled in the breeze. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly where it was supposed to be.